in the coal mines was really, really tough, and Dad didn't like that at all. It was really, really cold. So they had planned to move to Washington State and get out of that cold weather. Fortunately for my folks, a couple things happened. One is I became the product of living in Wyoming during those cold winter months. So I was born in the spring of 1950, and the company, Acme Coal Mining Company, literally paid the medical bills, which was neat because the folks didn't have any money to do this. So the neighboring town, Sheridan, is where I was born at. The oddity was that the coal mining company wouldn't pay, or you had to fill out some forms to pay the postage, so they could send the live birth records and so forth to the state capital. I guess that's Sheridan, Wyoming, or Cheyenne, Wyoming, I guess. So in order to send it there, they had to, I think spent 50 cents or 52 cents or something like that to send the records. And my dad said, oh heck, he had that kind of change on his, so he paid the records. So he used to always tease me that I was his 52-cent kid. So he paid for me. So that's how I got there in that. And so after one season in Wyoming, my parents had enough funds saved to pay to fix the car and get themselves to Washington State, and my dad did not want to spend another year in coal country. So we became Washingtonians, and obviously I knew nothing of, as a baby, knew nothing of Wyoming. But at least I was born there, I guess. So, but we moved to Washington when I was 6 months old, and the first stop that my folks talked about was Toppenish. And my uncle and his family were living in Toppenish, and they had a very large family, I think 12, 14 kids, something like that. And they stayed there. And my uncle was from my mother's side. He was a Trujillo. So they were living in Toppenish, and they knew about Hanford, so my uncle was able to get a job working in Hanford as a janitor. My father was able to become employed at Hanford as a mechanic for the bus, I guess, vehicles that they used to transport guys back and forth from the Hanford area back to the civilian outside area. So my dad did that for a while, and obviously constantly looking for work, and did multiple jobs and had multiple jobs at the same time. So he was working 2 or 3 part-time jobs. He was able to get hired for it by the Burlington Northern Railroad, and eventually went permanent with those guys, and he worked there for 29 years. So he was able to work there and eventually retire from the railroad. So my father had a long-term relation with him. But when he was establishing himself in the Tri-Cities and looking for employment, one thing that they had as a plus for veterans in those days is you can get housing. So they were building brand new homes. Now these homes probably were 1,000 square feet or smaller. They were not big. 2 bedrooms, small little homes. But they were brand new. And if you're a veteran, you could apply for and I guess be in a bid process and get a home. And my father was able to do that, and he got a home. So we moved into this brand new home. And so we were 2 blocks away from the housing program that was here. There was Tri-Cities was considered, Pasco was considered an agricultural area, and because Hanford was such a big military complex, the Navy had been involved in protecting Hanford. So they literally had built Navy homes for the naval guys, and they would patrol the Columbia River and both sides of Hanford area and protect that area. And so maybe the Coast Guard was involved with them and so forth. But nonetheless, they were called Navy homes. Well, eventually the farm worker families and low-income families moved into these Navy homes. And so a lot of my friends and buddies lived in the Navy homes, but we lived 2 blocks away on Sacagawea Street in the new veteran housing. So we grew up in those areas. I went to a Catholic school in Tri-Cities, and it was called St. Patrick's. And it was brand new. There was literally no grass at the school, so they would give us holy cards so we could pick tackweeds at the school grounds. And if you picked 10 tackweeds, you would get a holy card. And for us kids, we thought that was the neatest thing, and we were collecting Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, and John the Baptist, and all these holy cards that we thought were really neat. And we would put them like baseball cards. We'd put them on our bicycles, and we could ride around through the area, and you could make the sound like of your cards would flap on the spokes of the bicycle. But we would trade our cards with each other, like baseball cards. I had two Marys, and I wanted a Joseph or whatever. We'd swap cards, and the Jesus card was thicker than the other cards. That made a better sound on the bike, so we would do that. But if the nuns would catch us, boy, we were in trouble. But I went to this school with my brother and my sister, and it was a small school, but we were the first Latinos in the school. So I guess we were, from that end, breaking ground and being pioneers. And it was difficult for the school to deal with Latinos in those days. So they were a bit more regimented with my brother and sister, and by the time I got there, I was more the rebel. So I didn't have as much willingness to obey some of the commands of our nuns in their outfits. But one of the most striking things that I still recall to this day is when I went to school for the first time, and I was being brought in and signed up for school. The teachers were asking me what my name was so they could register me for the school. And I kept saying that. They said, well, my name? I said, well, my dad calls me cacahuate, or peanuts. And they said, no, we can't use that. And I said, oh, okay. And I went, Junior. They call me, my parents would always call me Junior. I was named after my father. And they said, no, what's your formal name? What's your real name? And I went, oh, well, it's Tomas. And they said, oh, you're Tom. And I looked at my parents, and they didn't say anything. I looked at this nun, and I was going, and she said, your name is Tom. Well, you didn't argue with a nun, so I went, yes, ma'am. So I was Tom from first grade through ninth grade. So that kind of stuck. When I went to high school, all the kids I grew up with in that Catholic school, they knew me as Tom. And when I was in high school, our school had about 300 kids in the school, and we had a smaller black population, about 25 kids in those days. We had very few Latinos that would remain in school. A lot of kids had dropped out, or part of the migrant families, as migrant stream, they would move a lot. So we had some families that were starting to settle out, and since we had been living literally full time in Pasco the whole time, we were not moving. So I grew up also in Pasco High School. So the school was still adjusting to us kids being around, kids of color. So by the time we graduated from high school, there were about 5 kids in my graduating class of Latinos and about 25 black students. The rest were Anglo kids. But when we graduated, the oddity is once you completed your graduation ceremonies, they put you on a school bus and, off to this, to one of the clubs, and they would allow us to party at that club. And so the kids were out in the street getting drunk and doing crazy stuff. When our bus pulled up, a number of the black kids and a number of us Latinos were on the bus. They didn't allow us into the building because it was the Elks Club, and it was a segregated club at the time. So they would not allow us to join in our graduation ceremony. So being the rebels that we were, we just weren't going to take no for an answer. So we immediately started chanting and protesting. And we're on this bus, literally in front of the building. So we made enough noise, and they didn't know what to do, these people that were letting folks in. They realized you got to let these kids in. It's part of the graduation piece. So they let us in. So I guess we were breaking ground and breaking the rules at the Elks Club to have these black and Latino students come into the club for our graduation ceremony. And that was one of our first moments, very clear moment of what happened in those days. To this day, that Elks Club in that building is still existing in the Tri-Cities. I'm sure it's not segregated now, but that was 1968. But when I went to school there, one of the odd things that going to a Catholic school, I had a very, very good foundation in my academics, math, English, and those kind of pieces. But when I was talking to student counselors, they said they had a different look at me. And I remember clearly that my counselor asked me to look at my hands. And I was going, didn't know what that meant. So I'm staring at my hands and going, what's that mean? And she said, you see those hands? And I went, yeah. And she said, well, those are working hands. Those aren't academic kind of hands. I go, okay. And she said, you need a blue-collar job. I went, oh. So, bam, hit you in the nose. Now, this was probably about 1966. Since the Civil Rights Act had passed in 64, the country was just starting to address the questions of segregation or desegregation. And in those days, the oddity was a lot of the folks clearly were still believing in the old thoughts, and us kids were bumping into it, face first. So we were clearly being told this. So in my case, I came home and told my parents. And I was talking to my father, and my father, being the blue-collar guy working for the Burlington Northern, he looked at me and said, well, Tomas, what's wrong with that? And I went, I guess nothing, And he says, well, if the point is that you need to work with your hands, he said, you do have to realize that you make better money if you have a trade skill. Farm work is hard work, but it doesn't pay well. And he says, get a good paying job. It's more than just work. It's a good paying job. So he said, get a trade. So I was a focused young man. So trying to do that, I ended up going to my metal shop class instructor. And I really enjoyed metal shop. And I was fairly good in his class and good academically in school. So they allowed me to enter into their welding program. And so I literally, by the time of graduation, became a certified welder.